The Improper Marriage of Lady Penelope. Chapter 1. The Spirit Market. Lady Penelope Hastings had perfected the art of the melancholy sigh. She delivered one now, a delicate exhalation that fluttered the black lace of her fichu as her gloved fingers hovered over the grieving woman's clasped hands. The Mayfair drawing-room was dim, lit only by a single candle shielded by a crimson silk scarf. The air was thick with the scent of dried lavender and the sharper tang of anticipation from the 4 other guests seated around the mahogany table. "I sense a restlessness," Penelope murmured, her voice a low, ethereal whisper. "A spirit, newly crossed, full of regret. He is trying to reach you, Mrs. Holloway. A gentleman. A younger man." Mrs. Holloway, a wealthy widow swathed in bombazine, let out a choked sob. "My Benjamin. Is it my Benjamin?" Penelope closed her eyes, letting her head loll slightly. "He shows me a pocket watch. It was important to him. A gift, perhaps, from his father." "Yes," the woman gasped. "On his 21st birthday." From beneath her lashes, Penelope catalogued the room. Mrs. Holloway, predictable in her desperation. The vicar's wife, watching with pious, wide-eyed wonder. And Mr. Alistair Finch, the dead woman's brother, who stared at Penelope with an expression of such naked skepticism it was almost a physical force. He was a newcomer, brought along by a credulous aunt. Penelope had marked him the moment he sat down, the rigid set of his jaw, the way his keen, intelligent eyes roved over the room, noting the dimmed light, the hidden door where her accomplice, an aging actress named Maggie, operated the subtle wires and taps that made the spirit raps. Mr. Finch was a problem, a scientist, she'd heard, a man who dealt in facts and proofs. She focused back on her mark. "He is troubled, Mrs. Holloway. He speaks of a debt, a promise unfulfilled, a small debt, but a point of honour. It bars his way to the Summerland." Mrs. Holloway leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with tears. "I would do anything, tell me. Was it to a tailor? He was always so particular about his cravats." Penelope shook her head slowly. "Not a tailor. He whispers of a woman. A locket. He gave a locket, and he feels he took something in return. Something not rightfully his." The woman's hand flew to her own throat, to the very locket she wore. It was a fine piece, gold and amethyst. "This? He gave me this the week before he died. I don't understand." The vicar's wife interjected, her voice hushed with awe. "Perhaps he feels he took you from someone else, my dear. A mother's love is a jealous thing, and he was your only son." Perfect. The vicar's wife had just done half her work for her. Penelope seized on it. "The spirit guides tell me that for his soul to be at peace, the token must be surrendered. It anchors him to this earthly plane. If you were to offer it as a sacrifice to the spirits, to prove your love is greater than any earthly trinket, he could move on." It was the oldest trick in the book. Trade grief for jewelry. But the performance, the setting, the hope, it made it feel like a sacred transaction. Mrs. Holloway's hands trembled as she fumbled with the clasp of the locket. Mr. Finch's jaw tightened. He shifted in his chair, the sound unnaturally loud in the hush. Penelope met his gaze for a fraction of a second. His eyes were the colour of a winter sky, cold and clear, and they held no awe, no grief, only a sharp, predatory intelligence that was dissecting her every move. "Don't," he said, his voice a calm, quiet command that cut through the room's reverence. "Mrs. Holloway, I urge you to reconsider. This is a parlour trick designed to separate you from your valuables." A collective gasp ran around the table. Mrs. Holloway stared at him, her mouth agape. Penelope drew herself up, her expression one of wounded dignity mixed with righteous indignation. "Sir, you are in the presence of profound grief. If you cannot conduct yourself with respect, I must ask you to leave." I respect Mrs. Holloway's grief too much to watch her be exploited, he countered, his voice unwavering. I am Julian Croft, a Fellow of the Royal Society. I have studied these methods. The raps are produced by a simple mechanism, a small hammer or a cracking joint. The cold drafts you feel are from hidden vents. The spirit voices are tricks of ventriloquism. He turned his unflinching gaze on her. My lady, I came here tonight to observe, and I have seen enough. You are an exceptionally talented actress, but an actress nonetheless. The room was frozen. Mrs. Holloway looked from the locket in her hand to Julian's stern face, then back to Penelope's serene, sorrowful mask. For a terrifying second, Penelope saw her conviction waver. Then Penelope did something she had never done before. She took a risk. She looked not at Mrs. Holloway, but directly at Julian Croft. You speak of proof, Mr. Croft. You demand the evidence of your senses. But the spirit world is not bound by the laws of your laboratories. You see a trick, I see a miracle. You see a grieving woman, I see a soul on the cusp of peace. Her voice softened, losing its ethereal quality and taking on a tone of simple, profound sincerity. If I were a fraud, would I dare to do this? She closed her eyes, and instead of reaching out for the practiced script of her act, she reached for something else. She thought of the silence in her own house, the silence she had run from for years. The silence left by her father's suicide, a secret shame that gnawed at her. The desperate need to be someone, anyone, other than the impoverished, forgotten daughter of a disgraced man. I see a child, she said, her voice now a natural, quiet tone. The words felt pulled from her, not crafted. A small boy, crying in a darkened room. He is holding a wooden boat. There is a woman. She is gone. He is waiting for her, but she never comes. He feels a terrible, lonely fear. She opened her eyes. Julian Croft had gone pale. The skeptical sneer was gone, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded shock. The colour had drained from his face, leaving his eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name, fury, fear, and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like pain. His hands, which had been clasped calmly on the table, were now white-knuckled fists. No one in the room could have known the significance of what she had just described. Not the vicar's wife, not Mrs. Holloway. But Penelope knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had just hit upon a truth. Julian Croft rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, without a glance at anyone, he turned on his heel and strode from the room, his footsteps echoing sharply in the hallway before the front door slammed. The séance was over, and for the first time in her career as the celebrated medium, Madame Zara, Lady Penelope Hastings, had no idea what would happen next. Chapter 2. The Language of Proof. The following afternoon, Penelope sat in the small, shabby parlour of the house she shared with Maggie in Covent Garden. The gilt and velvet of her séance room were a world away from this cramped reality. She was staring at a single sheet of paper, delivered by a uniformed footman an hour earlier. Lady Penelope Hastings, my behaviour at the séance last night was inexcusable. I offer my profound apologies for my disruption. However, the manner of my departure requires explanation. I would be grateful if you would grant me an audience at a time and place of your choosing to discuss a matter of some delicacy and importance. Your servant, Julian Croft. It's a trap, Maggie said, peering over her shoulder. She was a stout woman with a kind face and a sharp tongue, decanting a bottle of cheap gin into a crystal decanter for appearances. He's a scientist. He wants to dissect you. Probably has a whole laboratory of instruments to prove you're a witch. He's not wrong, Mags. I am a fraud. Penelope's voice was flat. You're a businesswoman, Maggie corrected her stoutly. Providing a service, comfort to the grieving, and that's all. Then why did he run? Penelope whispered, more to herself than to Maggie. She had replayed that moment 100 times. the image of the little boy with the wooden boat. It had come from nowhere, a stray memory from her own childhood, perhaps, or simply a desperate, intuitive leap. But the look on his face, it had been the look of a man who had seen a ghost. Curiosity, that most dangerous of emotions, got the better of her. She sent a reply, agreeing to meet him in the public parlour of Grillon's hotel, a neutral, respectable ground. He was waiting for her when she arrived. He rose as she entered, and she was struck again by the intensity of his presence. Today, he was not the stern accuser, but a man wrestling with a private demon. His cravat was tied with precision, his coat impeccably cut, but his eyes were shadowed, as if he hadn't slept. "Lady Penelope," he said, his voice formal. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." She sat, her own defences high. "I came because your letter was intriguing, Mr. Croft. Are you here to finish your public debunking in private?" He flinched. "No, I am here to apologise sincerely for my rudeness and to ask you a question." He paused, gathering himself. "That final vision you described, the boy with the wooden boat, how did you know?" Here it was, the moment of truth. She could lie, weave another story, protect herself. But looking into his eyes, she found she couldn't. The con artist's greatest tool was a lie, but against the stark honesty of his pain, it felt like a coward's weapon. "I didn't know," she admitted quietly. "It was an accident, a guess, a desperate throw of the dice to salvage my performance." He stared at her, searching for a lie. "A guess," he repeated flatly. "A guess based on observation," she amended, the old habit of justification creeping in. "Your demeanour, your age. You carry the weight of an old sorrow, Mr. Croft. It's in the way you hold yourself, the rigidity, the defensiveness. I saw a man shaped by a childhood loss. The image of the boat. It simply came to me." He was silent for a long time. The clink of teacups and the murmur of conversation from other tables filled the space between them. "Her name was Eleanor," he said finally, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear. "My mother. She died when I was 7. She had promised to take me to the pond in the park to sail the boat my father had carved for me. She never came home. A fever took her in a single night. I waited for hours. The image, so vivid in her séance room, now had a name, a history, a terrible, lonely reality. Penelope felt a sharp, unfamiliar pain in her chest. Empathy, real, genuine empathy for another person. It was a feeling she had carefully suppressed for years. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and the words were inadequate, but they were utterly true. He looked at her, his eyes bleak. "My entire life has been dedicated to understanding the world through reason, through proof, because that world is safe. It follows rules. It doesn't leave a 7-year-old boy waiting by a door that will never open." And then you, a woman I had dismissed as a clever trickster, described that exact moment with a precision that no amount of research could have uncovered. "My mother died before you were born. My father never speaks of it. I have never told a soul about the boat." He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her to her chair. "So I am left with an impossible choice. Either you possess a power that defies every law of science I hold dear, or you accessed a memory so private, so deeply buried, that I cannot fathom how. I need to know which it is, Lady Penelope, not to expose you, for my own sanity." Penelope looked at this proud, brilliant, wounded man and felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. She could have lied and solidified her mystique, but for the first time, she wanted someone to know the truth. The real truth. "I am a fraud, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steady. "My name is Penelope Hastings. My father was a baronet who gambled away his fortune and then took a pistol to his head when I was 16. He left me with nothing but his name and a mountain of debt. I had no skills, no prospects. I discovered I had a talent for observation, for reading people. I give people what they want to hear. I take their jewels, and in return, I give them a few moments of hope that their loved ones are at peace. It is a transaction, a dishonest one, but a transaction nonetheless. She met his gaze, unflinching. What happened at the séance was an accident, a moment of intuitive connection that I cannot explain, but I am not a medium. I am a confidence trickster. He absorbed this confession, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You are also a woman of uncommon courage, to admit that to me. I am a woman who is tired, she corrected him softly. An idea, slow and daring, began to dawn in his eyes. You make your living by giving people proof of the afterlife they so desperately crave. What if you were to give them proof of something else, something real? I don't understand. My work, he said, leaning forward with a new energy. I am developing a series of lectures on the dangers of popular superstition, the credulity that leads people to be preyed upon by charlatans. I have the facts, the logic, the scientific method on my side. But facts are dry. They don't move people. They don't make them feel the danger. He hesitated, then pressed on. You have the one thing I lack, an audience. You move in circles I could never penetrate. The ton, the grieving wealthy, the credulous elite. You know their language, their fears, their hopes. What are you suggesting? She asked, though a cold suspicion was already forming. An exposé, he said, but not a hostile one, a collaboration. You help me understand the methods, the psychology. You allow me to witness your techniques, and together we create a lecture, a paper that will arm people against this very exploitation. We can turn your skills to a different purpose, education instead of commerce. He was offering her a way out, a path to legitimacy. But the price was total exposure. She would have to confess everything, not just to him, but to the world. She would be ruined, utterly. But then she looked at his face. He wasn't looking at her like a specimen to be dissected anymore. He was looking at her like a partner, an ally. And for the first time in years, Penelope felt a flicker of something other than fear and desperation. She thought of Mrs. Holloway's face, the desperate hope. She thought of her father's silence, the secrets that had destroyed her family. She thought of the honesty in Julian Croft's eyes. On one condition, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Name it. You teach me about your world too, science, reason. You show me that it's not just a cold, empty place of facts, but something that can offer comfort and understanding. You give me proof that the truth is better than a beautiful lie. It was an offer of exchange. Her secrets for his, her world for his. It was the most terrifying proposition of her life. Julian Croft considered her for a moment, and then a small, genuine smile touched his lips, transforming his stern features. Lady Penelope, I believe you have just proposed the most unusual bargain I have ever encountered. You have a deal. Chapter 3. An Unlikely Education. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Penelope's life. True to his word, Julian became her constant, if unusual, companion. Their meetings were clandestine, conducted in libraries, at the British Museum, and in the quiet corners of less fashionable parks. He was her tutor in the language of proof. He showed her how to use a prism to split light, explaining the physics of colour. He demonstrated the principles of pneumatics with air pumps and glass globes. His enthusiasm as he watched her understand a concept as pure as a child's. He took her to the Royal Institution, where they watched demonstrations of chemistry and electricity, and she was mesmerized. This world, so long dismissed as cold and masculine, was actually one of wonder. It was a different kind of magic, but magic nonetheless. You see, he said one afternoon as they walked through the quiet aisles of the natural history collection at the museum. A spiritualist would tell a grieving mother that the butterfly that lands on her windowsill is the soul of her dead child. It's a pretty thought, but it's false. A scientist would tell her that the butterfly is a marvel in its own right, a creature that transforms itself completely, that migrates thousands of miles, that perceives the world in ways we cannot imagine. Its reality is far more extraordinary than the fiction we try to impose upon it. Penelope looked at the cases of pinned butterflies, their colours faded, but their forms perfect. But the fiction gives her comfort. Does it? Julian asked gently. Or does it keep her trapped in her grief, looking for signs that will never come, rather than helping her to find wonder and meaning in the world that is still here? In turn, Penelope educated him. She took him to a crowded marketplace and pointed out the pickpockets, explaining how she read a mark's vulnerability, their distraction, their tells. She sat with him in a coffee house and deconstructed the conversations around them, revealing the hidden anxieties and desires in a glance, a gesture, a tone of voice. She showed him how she created her séance rooms, the subtle use of lighting, the hidden doors and wires that Maggie operated. He was appalled, fascinated, and grudgingly admiring. "It's a performance," he said one evening, as they reviewed the script for one of her old séances. "A piece of theatre. The psychology is brilliant." "It's manipulation," she corrected him, feeling the old shame. "It's applied psychology," he countered. "It's just aimed at a dishonest end. Think what you could do with these skills legitimately. You could help doctors understand their patients. You could help lawyers read a jury. You have a gift, Penelope. You've just been using it to survive." His use of her given name sent a small, warm shock through her. She looked at him, seeing not the skeptical scientist, but the man. The man who brought her a bag of roasted chestnuts because she'd mentioned liking them as a child. The man who listened to her stories of her father with quiet compassion, not judgment. The man whose eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity. The attraction was a slow-burning fire, fed by respect and intimacy. It was in the way his hand brushed hers as they examined a fossil. In the way his gaze lingered on her face when she laughed at one of his dry witticisms. In the charged silence that fell between them when their lessons ended and neither wanted to say goodbye. One afternoon, he took her to his private laboratory, a room in his townhouse filled with books, instruments, and the faint smell of chemicals. He showed her his most prized possession, a delicate orrery, a mechanical model of the solar system. He wound it carefully, and the tiny brass planets began their silent, stately dance around the golden sun. "My father gave it to me after my mother died," he said quietly. "He said that when I felt lost, I should look at this. It shows that even when we cannot see the order, there is one. That the universe moves according to laws that are beautiful and reliable, even when our own lives feel chaotic." Penelope watched the planets turn, their motion hypnotic. "It's beautiful, Julian." He turned to her, his face close to hers in the dim light of the laboratory. "I used to think the only reliable truth was in here," he said, his voice low. "In the equations, the proofs. But you've shown me something else." "What?" "That there is a truth in feeling, too. In connection." He reached out and gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear. His touch was electric. "That the most complex system in the universe is the human heart, and it doesn't follow any laws I've been able to discover." "Penelope," he breathed, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I did not expect this. I came to expose you, and instead, you have exposed me to hope, to feeling." She wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them, but the ghost of her deception hung in the air between them. She stepped back, her heart pounding. "You are teaching me to value the truth, Julian," she said, her voice trembling. "And the truth is, I have not been honest with the world, and until I am, I cannot be honest with you, not in the way I want to be." He saw the fear in her eyes, the conflict. He nodded slowly, his hand falling back to his side. Then we finish what we started. We write the lecture. We tell the truth. Together. He made it sound so simple, so noble. But Penelope knew the cost. She would be shunned, arrested perhaps. She would lose everything. But as she looked at Julian, at the trust and affection in his eyes, she realized that the prospect of losing him was far, far worse. And if she continued to live a lie, lose him, she would. Chapter 4. A Public Reckoning. The lecture hall at the Royal Institution was packed. The cream of London society had come, drawn by the most scandalous rumour of the season. The celebrated medium, Lady Penelope Hastings, was going to publicly confess to fraud in collaboration with the notorious skeptic, Mr. Julian Croft. Penelope stood in the wings, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was not wearing her usual séance attire of black silk and lace. Instead, she wore a simple gown of deep blue wool, a gift from Julian. It was the kind of dress a respectable woman would wear, and it felt like a costume far more foreign than her medium's robes. Maggie was beside her, squeezing her hand. "You don't have to do this, love. We can be on a ship to France by morning." "I do have to, Mags." Penelope looked out at the crowd. She saw Mrs. Holloway in the third row, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. She saw the vicar's wife, the credulous aunt who had first brought Julian to the séance, and she saw them all, the wealthy, the grieving, the curious, her marks, her patrons, her judges. On the stage, Julian was concluding his introduction. He spoke of science, of skepticism, of the importance of protecting the vulnerable from exploitation. He was brilliant, passionate, and utterly convincing. Then he turned and extended his hand towards the wings. "I give you," he said, his voice clear and strong, "Lady Penelope Hastings." The walk to the centre of the stage was the longest of her life. She felt the weight of 100 stairs. She saw the sneer on the face of a rival spiritualist in the back row. She saw the pity on the face of a society matron who had once been a client. She reached Julian, and he took her hand, giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. Then he stepped back, leaving her alone at the lectern. She looked out at the sea of faces, and for a moment, the old instinct took over. She wanted to perform, to weave a spell, to deflect. But then she looked at Julian, and she saw not a scientist observing a specimen, but a man holding his breath, hoping for her. She began to speak. She told them her real name. She told them about her father, his debts, his suicide. She told them about her fear, her poverty, her desperate need to survive. She explained with a clarity that surprised even herself how she did it. The observation, the cold reading, the use of accomplices. She described the hidden wires, the pre-show research, the way she manipulated grief into gold. A murmur ran through the crowd. A man called out, "Shame!" A woman began to cry. Penelope pressed on. She talked about Mrs. Holloway's locket, and a fresh wave of whispers erupted. She saw Mrs. Holloway in the crowd, her face pale, her hands clutching the locket that was still around her throat. Penelope's voice faltered. "I took advantage of a mother's love," she said, her voice thick. "There is no excuse for it. I can only offer my profound and sincere apology and the return of every item I ever took under false pretenses. My accounts are open. My ill-gotten gains will be returned." She looked down at her hands, gripping the edge of the lectern. She had done it. She had told the truth. The silence in the hall was absolute. Then, a voice cut through the quiet. It was Mrs. Holloway. She stood up, her face wet with tears. But she was not looking at Penelope with hatred. She looked confused, hurt, but also, strangely, something else. "You described my Benjamin's locket," Mrs. Holloway said, her voice trembling but clear. "You knew about it. You knew he gave it to me. How, if it was all just trickery? It was the one question Penelope could not answer. She looked helplessly at Julian. Julian stepped forward. Mrs. Holloway, that is the question that brought me here. And it is the one thing for which I have no scientific explanation. Lady Penelope has a gift, not for speaking to the dead, but for seeing the living, for understanding the human heart with a clarity that borders on the miraculous. She used that gift to deceive. Tonight, she is using it to tell the truth. He turned to the audience. She has shown me that the world is not simply a collection of facts to be proven. It is also a place of intuition, of empathy, of connection. She used those qualities for ill, but they are not, in themselves, ill. They are powerful, and I believe, given the chance, she can use them for good. He looked back at Penelope, and in his eyes she saw not just respect, but love. Unconditional, unwavering love. The room erupted. Some people were shouting in outrage, others were murmuring amongst themselves, but a few, a surprising few, were listening, thinking, their expressions no longer hostile, but contemplative. Penelope had shattered their illusions, but she had also given them something real, a story of fear, survival, and the painful choice to be honest. The weeks that followed were difficult. There were scandalous articles, there were threatening letters, there were former clients who demanded not just their jewelry back, but vengeance. Penelope faced them all, with Julian by her side. She sold everything she owned to make restitution. She and Maggie moved into a tiny set of rooms. She was, in the eyes of society, ruined. But she was also, for the first time in her life, free. And then, on a crisp autumn morning, Julian Croft came to call. He found her in her small parlour, darning a stocking, a shaft of sunlight falling across her work-worn hands. She looked up, and her heart leaped at the sight of him. He did not sit. He stood before her, tall and serious, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. "I have spent my life searching for proof," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have sought it in laboratories, in books, in the stars, and I have finally found it. The only proof that truly matters." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band. "Penelope, you are the most courageous, intelligent, and confounding woman I have ever met. You taught me that the heart has its own reasons, its own truths, that no equation can capture. I love you, not in spite of your past, but because of it, because of the woman you chose to become." He knelt before her, right there on the threadbare carpet. "Marry me, not Lady Penelope, the medium, not Madame Zara, the fraud. Marry me, Penelope, the woman who dared to tell the truth, even when it cost her everything. Be my partner, in life, in all things. That is the only future I want. That is the only proof I need." Tears streamed down Penelope's face. She thought of the little girl waiting for her father to come home, the young woman who had learned to lie to survive, the woman who had stood on a stage and bared her soul. All of them had led to this moment. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the reality of him. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, Julian." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it felt more real, more precious than all the jewels she had ever conned. He rose and took her in his arms, and when he kissed her, it was a promise of a life built not on the shifting sands of illusion, but on the solid ground of trust, respect, and a love that needed no proof beyond the beating of their two hearts. Finally, honestly, one. Maggie, peeking through the crack in the door, wiped a tear from her eye and quietly pulled it shut, leaving them alone in their sunlight. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette.